Hello and welcome to this presentation. I'm Smita Purohit. In this session, we're going to look at how to improve the performance of your students in Cambridge English Young Learners tests. I'd like to begin by telling you a bit about Cambridge English Language Assessment and what we offer for younger students. Cambridge English Language Assessment is a not-for-profit organization of the University of Cambridge and provides the world's leading range of qualifications for learners and teachers of English with around 4.5 million candidates from 130 countries. Our suite of internationally recognized qualifications takes learners step by step through each stage of school and beyond. The first tests are our 3 young learners tests, starters, movers and flyers, which are aimed at primary and lower secondary age learners. Following on from these, we have Key for Schools, Preliminary for Schools, and the First for Schools for late primary and secondary age learners. And the Cambridge English Advanced is to prepare school learners for university and the workplace. Our highest level exam, Cambridge English Proficiency, is for very high achievers. In today's presentation, we will look at the first exams in this suite, our Young Learners tests, and it would be great to see how many of you are familiar with these starters, movers or flyers. Could you please write down which of the 3 you have prepared or are currently preparing students for? You have 10 seconds. Today, we're going to look at ideas for how you can help your students who are taking any of these tests. Let us look at what motivates young learners and how this relates to preparing for tests. We will then look at some ideas of how we can motivate learners in the classroom. We are also going to consider some practical ideas for preparing your learners for Cambridge English Young Learners tests. I'll also show you some great tips for developing your young learners' exam preparation skills in general, and we'll try out some fun games that will help young learners prepare for these tests without them even realizing it. We'll then go on to look at how important it is to involve parents and children's experience of learning English and preparing for English tests. So first, let's look at motivating young learners. What can we do to generate or increase young learners' motivation when it comes to preparing for tests? Well, ideally, we want to stimulate the children's interest. Young people are curious and eager to learn, so they can be a great audience. Then, we need to make them want to do something, to learn some new language or to practice something that they have recently learned. So, how do we go about that? So, we can get their attention with a picture, a sound, a joke, a question, a word or phrase on the board, or a piece of music. Of course, the way you choose to start each lesson and the way you choose to grab their attention will depend on what you're going to teach. Consider this. If you are teaching animal names, which of the following would be a good way to get them interested in the topic? You have 20 seconds for this task. The answer is playing a video about the zoo. We also need to make our learners feel challenged. It's very important to get the level of difficulty right. It's best to gradually increase the level of challenge, starting with something relatively easy, but not too easy. Then gradually increase the difficulty so the children feel successful, but at the same time challenged. Another important thing is to keep your learners engaged. If you've grabbed their attention and got them interested in the topic, then you don't want to throw away this good work. You need to maintain their interest and keep them engaged while they are learning. One way to do this is to make an activity into a competition. I'm sure that you've got many other ideas for how to maintain their interest. So here goes. You have 60 seconds to write down some ideas on how to maintain interest. Great. So let us look at some ideas. Things like changing the way learners are working, arranging them in pairs and then groups, getting them to move around, perhaps getting them to go to the board to write something on it, telling them a joke or something funny, getting them to make something, or to act something out that they've just learned in a role play. Please study the activity before you. You have 30 seconds to go through it. Which of these have been done in the activity shown on the previous slide? You have 30 seconds to work through it. Yes, please check your answers with what's on the board. They have worked in a group. They've gone to the board. They've used role play and they're moving around. It's important to praise children. They respond very positively when they feel they're doing well. But please make sure the praise is deserved. So praise your learners for trying hard rather than for just getting it right. That way, even those who got something wrong will feel a sense of success if they tried hard. Students quickly lose motivation when there is a sense of failure, so it's important to encourage success. Praising your learners also makes them feel safe and encourages them to take risks with language rather than worrying about making mistakes or getting things wrong. This is really important in language learning as it can help learners get to the next level. In general, with young learners, it is good if you can make activities seem more like a game than an exercise. Then they'll feel as though they're playing rather than working. Remember, too, that young learners do get bored quickly, so it's a good idea not to spend too long on any one activity. Keep changing the activity and vary the pace. Follow an exciting, lively activity with something slower and quieter. Mix the groups up so that children work with different people. Don't let them get bored. As I mentioned earlier, try to ensure that there is plenty of variety in your lessons. It's important that an activity doesn't become boring. Children quickly become demotivated when something goes on too long, is too difficult, or is repetitive and monotonous. As teachers, we need to think about making sure that we regularly change activities and that these activities go on for the right amount of time, not for too long. Now, we are going to look at differentiation in the context of the reading and writing ability. Let's start by looking at the rationale behind incorporating differentiation into a classroom. All classes consist of a group of individuals who may not only have different levels of ability, but also different interests, different degrees of motivation, and different language needs. This means that they respond differently to different task types, topics, and interaction in the classroom. In turn, this can affect how much they learn. In our schools, we are faced with various challenges. One of them is teaching a mixed ability class of youngsters of around 40 to 50 students. Firstly, teachers will always be dealing with differences between learners in the class. Secondly, this calls for an opening which involves all students. For example, a word game or a quiz. Thirdly, we need to adapt reading and writing tasks to use in these situations to engage the weak and strong learners. Grouping learners appropriately is very important. One tactic teachers can use in large classes is peer correction. So now let's take a look at some ideas and activities for practicing tasks in the Cambridge English Young Learners tests. We're going to focus on ideas for helping learners with the tasks in the reading and writing papers for these tests. First of all, look at the question at the top of the screen. All of you know that there are vocabulary lists available for Cambridge English Starters, Cambridge English Movers, and Cambridge English Flyers tests. These can be found in the Teacher's Handbook, which is available on the Teaching Support website. This picture on the right of your screen is taken from the front of the handbook. The other picture is from the Cambridge English Starters Word List picture book. So, how often do you use these vocabulary lists to prepare tasks and activities for your class? We'll be looking at some ideas for using these lists in a moment. Obviously, learning vocabulary is important for any exam. If your learners know the kind of vocabulary that is used in the test they are taking, then they are more likely to perform well. So once your learners have looked at some of the vocabulary in class, you will want them to learn it. One of the ways of encouraging them to learn it is by introducing some testing into your lessons. There are many ways of testing vocabulary. For example, holding up a flashcard and eliciting a word. Can you think of activities or ways of testing vocabulary? You have 30 seconds to note down your ideas. Here is a summary of some activities that you can use. You could use memory tests in which children have to remember where a word or picture is. Children really enjoy having their memory tested. They also love drawing and coloring, so you could introduce an element of this into your tests. If the learners are listening and coloring or drawing, then they are also developing the skills that they need for the listening part of the test. Another idea is to do word puzzles such as word search, grids, or crosswords. So let's try a memory test activity using a picture from the Cambridge English Starters Word List picture book. Please take a look at the picture and note the names that have been given to the characters in the picture. We have Miss Jones, Tom, Joe, and Sue. You have 1 minute to study the people in the picture and remember as much as possible about them. So you have 60 seconds for this task. Now, I want you to look at these questions and write your answers on a piece of paper. You only need to write 1 or 2 words. So let's do an example together first. The first question, what is Joe doing? You have 15 seconds. That's right, he's playing the guitar. When you do this with your learners, you could tell them that it is okay to leave out the. You might also want to focus on the spelling of guitar and highlight that it's got a UI in it after the G and that it ends with AR. Now let's go for a memory test. Now write your answers to the rest of the questions on a piece of paper. You have 90 seconds. Let's run through the answers. Joe is playing the guitar and he's wearing a white shirt, tie and grey trousers. Tom is painting. Sue is drawing and Miss Jones is wearing green, and just to remind ourselves, here's the picture again. When your learners have finished this activity, they could compare their answers with a partner. When your learners have finished this activity, they could compare their answers with a partner before you go through the answers as a whole class. Make sure they can see a written record of correct answers, so it's a chance for them to practice self-correction. Encourage them to make sure that their spelling is correct. You could use this picture to test other things. For example, you could ask your learners to try to think of the vocabulary for all of the things that they can see in the picture. You could then give them letters at the beginning of words. For example, look at the letters here. Ask your learners what things they can remember starting with these letters in the picture that they have just looked at. Perhaps we could do the first one as a test now. Write something down beginning with the letter F that you have just seen in the picture. You have 10 seconds. Yes, the word flower, floor. Great. And this could lead very easily into a game of I Spy with things that you can see in your own classroom. Now, have a look at the other letters on your screen. Can you think of the words from the picture that start with each letter? You have 60 seconds. Here are the answers to the things in the picture that we saw. Did you get them all? These words are all in the Cambridge English Starters word list. Any suitable picture can be adapted for use with the word lists for Cambridge English Flyers and Cambridge English Movers or any other test. To make the memory game more interactive, you could get learners to come up to the board when they know an answer and write the words by the letters. Or, after learners have checked their spelling, they could write the words on a poster which you could stick up in the class. There are lots of other memory games that you could play, and if you have access to computers or tablets, you can play a great game designed especially for young learners by Cambridge English Language Assessment. It's called Monkey Puzzles, and we'll provide you with the links to the online version of this at the end of the presentation. It's also available for iPads and iPhones on the App Store. This game has a series of 8 different games to practice reading and vocabulary. If your learners have access to this technology, this opens up opportunities for them to explore and practice their English outside the classroom so that it builds their study skills. This is the first game that you will see in Monkey Puzzles. As you can see, it's a familiar memory game in which you will have to click on the footprints and match the picture with a word. You can obviously do this in class with real cards, but sometimes your young learners may want to play the games on their own. Or they could play it in their free time for homework if they have a computer, tablet or smartphone at home. Let's now look at some test tasks. This is a Cambridge English Flyers Reading and Writing Part 1 task. This activity involves reading descriptions of words and choosing the correct word. Candidates have to write the correct word next to the definition. So, how can you practice this type of task with learners? What about a weekly vocabulary revision quiz? Give learners a list of words to learn and tell them that they'll be tested on them. Set it up as a team competition instead of a test. It's easy to find simple definitions for words from the vocabulary lists online or in an elementary learner's dictionary. Here is an example from the Cambridge Essential English Dictionary, which is free online. This word is in the sport and leisure section of the Cambridge English Flyers vocabulary list. So after looking at this definition, you have 10 seconds to write down the word. That's right, it's backpack or rucksack. So you can easily create your own activities that practice for part 1 of the Cambridge English Flyers test, just by using words that learners have recently learned. If you wanted to get your learners moving around the classroom to create variety, you could put definitions up all around the room. You could give each learner a word to match to the definition. They could all walk around checking the definitions until they found the one that matched their word. Another easy activity that practices spelling is unjumbling words. You could take a set of words from the word list according to the topic. Here is an example of some words that are in the home section of the Cambridge English Movers word list. You have 20 seconds to look at them. So, can you guess the words? Please write down any of the words that you can unjumble. You have 30 seconds for this task. Great. I'm sure you've got the right answers there. Here are the answers. When you give the answers, make time for your learners to check their own spelling. It's important for them to start checking their work and to think about spelling words correctly. It encourages them to take responsibility for their own learning. And of course, if you want to make it more kinesthetic, you could cut up the letters or get learners to make their own words and cut them up for others to unjumble. Part 2 of the Cambridge English Movers and Cambridge English Flyers reading and writing tests both have yes or no tasks based on pictures. Here is an example of a Cambridge English Flyers Part 2 task. A variation on this type of task is to offer a choice of words instead of just yes or no. So you can use any picture that has a connection to a topic you've been looking at in class. So we have similar tasks here, but notice at 2 different levels. This picture is from the Cambridge English Starters Word List picture book. And it's a great picture that's sure to get your learners' attention. So instead of a yes or no, the learners have to look at the picture and choose the correct word. Here are a few examples, but you can create your own. Of course, you could always just practice yes or no statements instead with a picture. Students love true or false style activities. In the Cambridge English Movers and Cambridge English Flyers reading and writing tests, learners need to know the past simple tense. Memory chains can be a fun way to practice the past tense. For example, set a topic or theme such as my last holiday. Divide the learners into groups of 4 and ask them to make a memory chain. The first learner says something they did. For example, on my last holiday, I went to the sea. The next learner has to remember that and say what they did. As the game continues, the learners have to remember more and more before they say what they did. Afterwards, the learners could collaborate to write out the whole list of things they did. So this is how it will look halfway through. Here's an example of what they might write for a group of 4 learners, whose names in this case are Maria, Juan, Carlos, and Teresa. After you've done a practice exercise, it's useful to show learners the test tasks so that they can see how they've been practicing for the test. Now, let's have a look at some teaching tips to help your learners to be really well prepared for their test. These are some ideas you can use with any learners who are preparing for any of the young learners' tests. Remember to set achievable goals regularly and make it clear to your learners what those goals are and when they have achieved them. The more they know about what they have learned, the more motivated they will be. Plan when you will give homework. It's good to give it regularly and try to tie it in with what you're doing in class and make it fun. For example, you could ask your learners to play one of the monkey puzzle games. Show learners study skills and practice them. For example, how to keep notes or how to record vocabulary in a notebook. It's important to review learning regularly, testing and revising language that learners have learned will make it more memorable, and it can be a fun part of the class. Encourage your learners to look for their mistakes and correct them. If they can do this, then it will help them to make quicker progress. So let's see, as teachers, at what intervals should we help students by setting goals and reviewing their work? You have 30 seconds for that task. Ideally, monthly and weekly reminders of their goals will help students progress in language learning. And another point to consider is how much the parents of your learners get involved in their learning. Think about the question. How much do parents you know get involved with their children's English learning? You have 30 seconds for that task. Well, it's good if a lot of your learners have parental involvement. It also is important in supporting the child's effort at school. Here are some ideas for getting parents more involved. You could do something as simple as giving a 10-word vocabulary list to learners. Please ask their parents to test them on the words, both orally and in writing. If parents are unlikely to know the words, then translation could be used. So it's like a bilingual test. For example, the parent says the word in their own language and the child must say the English word. Here's another exercise. Children have to write down 10 things in their homes that are green in color. Another idea is finding things together around the house and writing them down. For example, a homework worksheet could involve finding 10 things that are in the family kitchen. You could give the child a list of food items. They have to ask each member of their family to put them in order of how delicious they think they are. Or it could be a sport. Each member of the family or parent has to put the sport in order, whichever they like best, to the least. It's important for children to see progress, but it helps if their parents follow their progress. For example, you could get learners to keep a progress chart for homework that their parents can monitor and sign. You can also display pictures of Cambridge English Young Learners certificates in your classroom for parents to see what their children can achieve. This can help involve parents and encourage them to see the value of taking the test. You could organize a mini graduation ceremony for parents where you could give out certificates to the children. This can be a good way to help parents and children to acknowledge their progress and their success. Remember, children don't fail young learners' tests, so everyone will be able to receive a certificate. teachers need to reflect on the following points about their students' learning. So let's take 30 seconds to look at those points. The answer to that is yes to all of the above. So let's review what we have covered in this presentation. We've talked about what motivates young learners and how this relates to preparing for tests, how to prepare pupils for Cambridge English Young Learners tests, and some tips for developing test preparation skills, some suggestions for ways in which parents can get involved in helping their children prepare for their Cambridge English tests. These are some of the ideas and points we covered. So that's about it for the presentation today. I hope you found it interesting and useful.